ever had something that no matter how much you thought about it, nothing came? No answer. No pathway to an answer. Not even an interest sign on the highway along to the answer. Just nothing. That's how I felt with the readings this morning. I sat down like I normally do, and I started with prayer. Always a good place to start. Like I normally do. Then I read the readings like I normally do. Then I prepared myself for the links that normally just start to jump out at me. But nothing came. Okay, this happens sometimes. Sometimes they don't always come so quickly, so I break out my Bible. That's where all my notes are, and it's very comforting for me, so I open it up, and maybe some context can help me put everything together. The New Testament readings today, the Gospel and Paul's letter to the Ephesians, both follow pretty much directly on the heels of last week. So they're pretty much in context. But the Old Testament, now that one comes out of nowhere. So that one, that's where I'm thinking. That the Old Testament, that's my workhorse. It's rather underappreciated by most preachers and laity alike, because we are New Testament people after all. Jesus came and fulfilled the Old Testament. So why are you preaching to me from the Old Testament? Preach to me from the New Testament. But much depth can come from the Old Testament, especially in concert with the New. But the only thing I got from the context really was a story that sets up the one we have today in motion, but that setup is far too long for me to really get into. And once I would get to the point, it would have very little to do with making any connection at all with the gospel lesson today. So I put it away, and I think, what in the world were the creators of this lectionary thinking by uniting these readings? I can't find anything at all in common. So obviously I've missed something. So I go to some websites that I use that normally allow me to catch the links that I've missed. You guessed it, there was nothing. In fact, these sites are giving readings from an entirely different set of readings, an entirely different lectionary. They have John's account from the feeding of the 5,000, and they link it to 2 Kings 4. When Elisha multiplies the first fruits, 20 barley loaves, and the fresh ears of grain to feed 100 men. That would have been an awesome link for last week. Thanks for nothing, their website. Now I'm getting a bit desperate. I have to have something to say today. So I go back to praying again. This is always a good idea. It's God's message after all, and He might as well give it to me. So I give the old microphone a tap and say, "Is this thing on?" But nothing discernible jumps out. So I have a bunch of old sermons. Maybe I can just knock the dust off of one of them and breathe a little life into it. Something, just something that I've said before. If nothing else, maybe it'll just give me a clue as to where to go with all this. A little side on this. I hate doing this. I hate bringing up an old sermon. I have a few that I have in the can, as it were. They're normally funeral sermons, but for the most part, I feel like this is Saul going to the necromancer, the witch of Endor. Saul had banned all necromancers, all mediums from the kingdom on pain of death. But he was so desperate for advice that he went in disguise to go to this woman, and after convincing her that he was not there to kill her, to trick her into trapping herself so that he could kill her, she asked him whom he wants to bring up. He says, Samuel, the prophet. So she brings up Samuel, and Samuel says to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" See, this is how I feel when I bring up an old sermon. You know, my sermons are talking back to me. Why have you disturbed me? You know, so I write my sermons for a single moment in time. They have a context and all the things. So why bring them up for an entirely new time, an entirely new context? Well, because I'm getting desperate, that's why. So I'm trying everything. But apparently in almost 9 years of being a priest, I have never preached on this Sunday ever, apparently. Or at least I didn't write down the sermon. But it's probably for a good reason too. But that doesn't help me today. I need something. I said, okay, Lord, if you don't come through here, I'm just going to stand in the pulpit and I'm just going to stare at the people like an idiot until I get embarrassed enough to go sit down. So I take a breath, go get a cup of coffee, light my pipe and sit down and puff on it for a little bit. And then I pick up a pen and I lean forward to write. And then I look at my pen. And I look at my sermon from last week, and I thought, well, that's weird. I wrote the sermon in this pen. I normally just write notes in this pen. I have a fountain pen that I like to write my sermons in. That's really weird. I'm normally pretty consistent in the fact that I like to write with this pen. Threw my thoughts aside, and I wrote these words: making headway painfully. I thought, boy, howdy, do I feel their pain. This sermon is like pulling teeth. I really just can't seem to make any headway myself. Oh, well, hey, thanks, God. See, I tried to dig up a ghost. I tried to be like Saul, growing desperate to do God's will, that I wouldn't let the dead rest in peace. All the while I was struggling so much, there was Jesus, standing over my chaos, calmly and coolly there, just easily passing over the waters that were causing me to drown. I looked for a ghost. But Jesus says, take heart, have no fear, it is I. And then he got into the boat, and the storm ceased. Now I know where to go with my sermon. I was reminded about some advice that I had received as a curate. Just tell them about Jesus. And there he was, in the boat with me, and all my distress was gone. Now, how often do we do that? We try to find God. We pray and busy ourselves, and then we busy, and then we pray, and then we busy, and then we pray and get desperate and reach out for the wrong thing. The waters can get pretty hectic sometimes, to the point where it feels desperate and scary. But it is when things are desperate and scary that we are forced to search for Jesus. Like the woman who lost her coin and turns over the whole house to look for it. When we can easily find God, sometimes we can forget to look because we know right where he is. If I wanted to, I could just turn, there's God right there. But when we do this, we end up sliding away. You know, we wander like that sheep who knows where his master is and that he's protecting him, so he goes and ever further and further in search of food until he looks up and has no idea where he has wandered. It's here, when we have wandered away from God, that we must look beyond what we have always done to find him in new things. See, spiritual growth happens when we have to search for God. It happens because we have to stretch ourselves further than we normally would. And Jesus could have let his disciples know earlier that he was there. He wanted to just go pass by them, but then I think he saw them and he's like, look at that, they're still struggling. Oh, God bless them. And he could have simply walked around to the other side and met them where he told them he was going to be and where they expected him to be. He could have, but he went out where they didn't expect him to be in a way they didn't expect to find him. He let them struggle for a bit. But when they saw him in a new place doing something that they didn't know he could do, they were utterly astounded. God will not always be easily found. In fact, sometimes he will deliberately let us struggle. But when this happens, do not be afraid. Keep doing what you have been taught to do, what you know how to do. But also remember that if he doesn't immediately present himself, he has not abandoned you for some unknown to you slight. He is giving you the opportunity to stretch yourself and to find him in another place. This process, while necessary for everyone, is especially disconcerting when something is there with a very hard deadline, like a sermon. But thankfully, he does come in the end. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.